Hi, and welcome to the Mind the Gap podcast. My name is Joel. I'm a professional athlete, a college student, and I also work in the tech industry. And right across from me digitally is my good friend and mentor, Steven. How you doing?
Hey, Joel, everybody, I'm Steven. Thank you for having me on. And I also am a technology executive and industry specialist focused on all sorts of IT technologies for decades now. And I'm excited to talk to you today and continue this podcast going forward, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, the inaugural episode, we're going to look back at this at some point and be like, man, look at us two rookies doing this thing. But yeah, and I think that's how the entire idea around this podcast really came about. It's an unlikely match, the two of us, I'd say. At least we shared somewhat of the same industry, but if you look at a lot of the landscape of podcasts, there's amazing podcasts out there, Scott Galloway, Kara Swisher, just to name a few of them. But there's a pristine similarity amongst most of them that these people that do these podcasts together are at very similar points in their life. It could be
Yeah.
career wise, even from an economical standpoint. And so that's what I'm saying. We're somewhat of an unlikely match to do a podcast together. How do you feel about that?
Look, I enjoy the generational gap as a mentor and somebody who coaches people of all different levels in their careers. It's common for me to be working with younger people and talking about what they're going through as they navigate their careers and professional lives. So I have many people who have worked for me in organizations that I've run where they're a great deal younger than me and going through many different phases of their life, and
Right.
also looking, by the way, for advice from people who have already been there and done that. So I think
Mhm.
this concept of mind the gap and our generational gaps and also the similarities that we may have, but also the differences
Right.
makes it very compelling for the audience.
Yeah. I mean, if you take a look at your CV, there's a lot of C's at the beginning of your job titles. So, but you do also work in a lot of startup contexts. Your experience has a lot of different startups in them, from, I believe, smaller ones to ones that are, let's say, catching the eyes of San Francisco localized companies, especially in the startup context. I also work at startups for the past 2 years of my professional career. I've been around startups a lot. What would you say are the biggest potential conflicts between these two generations? I guess if you could separate it into two generations, what would you say are some of the main things you see happening in an environment of a company?
Well, back to startups, I think startup appetite, to be a part of a startup and maybe kind of transversal generationally. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a Gen Z or a baby boomer or a Gen X, which I am. I was born in 1970. I think in many ways, people who are interested in working for a startup or with startups are a bit open to more risk and evolution, looking at a journey from a company perspective and early development, early incubation into actually going, and building that company and getting it to a point where it's scaling. And I think there are different types of personalities and backgrounds that are appropriate for different phases of that journey. When
Mhm.
it comes to the differences between those generations, I would say I'm Gen X, so I have a very different POV about things. I'm a very much about, like, there's a lot of memes and a lot of videos on Instagram about like drinking
Right.
out of fire hoses and
Mhm.
staying all day outside and climbing trees, and I having kids who are I have one millennial, and then I have what we call Gen Z, two Gen Zs. So for me, knowing that as a parent, as well as having staff members and team members throughout other organizations I've managed, this generation, these two generations look at things drastically differently than, say, Gen X.
Mhm.
I think, and I'll focus more on the Gen Z side because I have the kids in that age group, but I would say they're looking for more instant gratification. I think this also has to do something with how they've been trained coming up, the way social media has had an impact, sort of that dopamine effect of getting things instantaneously. When I was in my 20s, we were in the infancy of the commercial internet. So getting information from a browser we didn't even have at that time, we had like basically text-based search. And then we
Mhm.
moved into visual kind of representation with HTML and all that. This was, early 1990s. So we'd have to wait for the image to actually generate, right? We'd have to wait for the actual rendering of an image on a page.
Hmm.
And you go, okay, this is amazing. I'm getting like access to the Library of Congress. That was my generation's view of instant gratification.
Right.
We didn't have access to these things in the physical. We now have access to them over the network. And then now, if you flash forward to a Gen Z or a Gen Alpha, they want something, they can have it delivered in 45 minutes. They need something, they want to be entertained, they can binge. And of course,
Hmm.
all the other generations can take advantage of these things, but it's a question of whether or not the mindset and the mentality is there to take advantage of it. I think the Gen Zs and Gen Alphas are much more oriented around this instant gratification concept. They're more comfortable with it, and they're also looking for it. So, I mean, it's what they want. I look at career wise with some people that are, I've had the opportunity to coach and or, manage as an organization. And I see people wanting to move up quickly into the next
Hmm.
level. I see them wanting to get, promotions and raises. When I look at that from an employer perspective as a leader, I want to help people earn those opportunities. I want to
Hmm.
challenge them by giving them more projects, initiatives that are going to be more career defining versus, oh, you've been here for a year, you automatically are eligible
Hmm.
for a promotion. And
Hmm.
in some, by the way, in some societies, regions, and some countries, even time equals promotion, and in most cases, it doesn't. And time is only just one example of a right. It's a metric. It's a metric. It does not equal you are qualified or you are eligible for the next level of your career. And I think that's where I see the material difference between how we are looking at people that feel they're entitled to versus the
Hmm.
people who are earning. And in many cases, the people who are earning it don't feel entitled to it. They're driving themselves to be eligible to earn it. And I think that's a very big generational gap.
Well, I mean, you're touching on a point I was trying to make downwards this episode, but because I looked at a few key metrics, one thing that struck me like a ton of bricks was the average time spent at a job for my generation is about 3 years.
Right. Yeah.
My dad, he's an opera singer, but he has been at the same opera for, he's creeping up to 40 years now. He's been in the same job. He went to college for it. He got a job, I don't know, 5 years after he graduated at that opera in Cologne in Germany, and he stayed there. My mom, she's been at the same company for 20 years. I've been at three different companies in 1.5 years now. One went somewhat bankrupt. One was supposed to be a short time gig. But I think, and when I thought about it, I came back to the story of how I got my first job. I was 15, I believe, and there was a grocery store right across the street from where we lived. And I asked my parents, how do I go about it? How do I get a job? My mom said, go over there, look the person in the eye, shake their hand, introduce yourself, and you'll get a job 9 out of 10 times. And I did, and it worked. So I still have that in me. The last time I looked for a job, and I've heard from so many people that have very good education and good qualifications, they look for a job by just throwing things at the wall until something sticks. I applied to, I believe, 70 different positions. I get the point where it's with what you said about instant gratification that people expect resonance and feedback from a position in terms of compensation and your rank and whatever. But at the same time, I do feel like everybody has to pick up their side of the couch. And I think that should also be reflected by the way a company handles themselves, starting by the recruiting process, starting by how you treat people that honestly are interested in working for you.
Look, I going back to something you said a moment ago about job change frequency. To be honest, in the tech industry, 2 3 years in a position, obviously is pretty typical. And it's not just, by the way, earlier mid career; it's late career as well. We go through such fast shifts from a technology evolution and life cycle, that we're seeing new changes like the emergence of AI and products and new capabilities and such amazing innovation, which is driving massive and rapid change. It's okay if you move on. And when I look at resumes, I don't ever get mired down on how long someone was there. In fact, if somebody's been there for like over 5, maybe 10 years, I'm actually looking at that in regardless of what level they're in and stage they're in. I'm actually looking at it and going, why did they stay there for 7 years? Why didn't they
Yeah.
take advantage of the AI revolution or
Right.
the internet revolution? So to me, those things don't bother me. And like 3 jobs in 3 years, okay, or 3 jobs in 2 years, whatever, that's also situational. You mentioned capital runway and, running out of cash and all those things. That's situational. Very easy for you to explain. I was running a company, we ran out of cash, we got hit during the downturn. Those things are all explainable. And by the way, there are life lessons that make you stronger. It's sort of like the Nietzsche said, that which does not kill you makes you stronger. Or
Yep.
Winston Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going, right? These are the
Hmm.
kinds of things that these great military and authors and philosophers have said. We are going to hit times in our lives, in our careers, personal, professional, where we're going to need to make shifts, pivots, and changes. And
Hmm.
it's okay to make a pivot or change. And it's
Hmm.
okay that things don't work out. In fact, I would rather see somebody in an interview context that said, I tried to do this and I stayed there as long as I could, but I couldn't stay there any longer. And they give really concrete examples about what they did while they were there, why they decided to move on, and what they are looking
Hmm.
for in their next opportunity. When I was at a big software company, went through a very, very public acquisition. It was one of the largest acquisitions that happened in 2023, one of the largest in software acquisition history so far. As I went through that process, I thought, well, one, do I want to be a part of this? And I actually pivoted out of that and I said, it's 3 years I was in the company and I said, it's about time for me to go. I don't want to stay for the next inning. And I, made that decision very consciously. Right. And
Hmm.
I decided that this was going to happen. And that somebody asked me, well, like, why did you leave? I'd be like, because I didn't want to go on to the next phase of the company where there was going to be dramatic de-investment in my portfolio, dramatic shrinkage of headcount and
Hmm.
workforce. And I didn't really want to be a part of that. I wanted to be a part of the growth mode, not about the conservation mode. So I think those are the things that you can bring back to your narrative, your personal narrative. Bring that back in how you explain your career. Bring that back into how you rationalize the changes you've made in your career. But I've heard every single measure and mode of, I worked here for 10 years, or I worked here for 1 year, I worked here for 1 month. I have a job that I took on in the pandemic. I worked there for 5 weeks. I could not stand working there. It's not on my resume. It's not in LinkedIn. I don't
Right.
talk about it. If somebody wants to talk about it, I can tell them about the reasons why and why I decided not to take it further. And they are very interesting reasons, but I will tell you, some things just don't matter. So when you think about the generational gap, for younger people, this might be, those kind of impediments may be real inhibitors for them in their careers. Or they may just be like standard daily activities. Like I worked here for 6 months. So be it. I
Hmm.
move on. I got more money. I got a newer position. I worked my way up the ladder. They may be able to explain that very well. And I think in that part of the instant gratification side, if they were in a job, they were floundering, or the company was floundering, they said, I got to get out of here. They were
Hmm.
actually making a critical decision that required analysis and deep thought. They came to that decision and they decided to make that happen. So they showed conviction and then they moved on. I respect that a lot.
Well, I what I've been hearing criticism towards my generation, but the job market in general, where it's like people are becoming too self-centered. They're looking too much into what's the best thing for me and are not willing to at some point give themselves up to the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're in a time in history of humanity where, being self-centered is not only your only choice, but also promoted by the environment we have. So I understand from a employee perspective that, looking at your situation, your job, your company, and saying, well, this environment is not good for me, or I'm not moving up the ladder the way I would like to, or I'm not being seen and heard or developed. I also understand the frustration from companies, from CEOs, owners, founders that are saying, well, at some point down the road, you have to dig deep And you have to have people, a team around you that's willing to work long hours, to maybe even work a little time with less pay than they actually deserve. And I feel like we're pulling into two directions here, where what the employees are looking for the best case scenario for themselves, and some companies are really struggling finding people. How would you say, what's the best approach? What's the best way to have a healthy amount of individualism, making sure that the environment you're in is good for you and you're thriving, but also not to bullshit yourself and be willing to put the work in to get to where you want to be? Because I feel like a lot of times this, it's not healthy for me, it's not yada yada yada, is also used as a lame excuse to get out of a position where you're forced to actually put in work and put in effort. What would you say is the fine line of individualism, but also giving yourself up for a greater good in the context of a company?
I think there's a couple of things you're kind of touching on, right? Sort of attracting and retaining talent. This is hard when you're a small company. Look, I've been in big, I just gave you an example of a very, very big company, but I've been in really small companies. The key to that is inspiring the people that you're trying to bring along for the journey. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that it's if you're a charismatic leader, entrepreneur, you can tell the story, you can draw the attention, get the interest. As far as the individual versus the organization, everybody in the early stage company, everybody's job is multiple functions. You don't have the luxury of saying, okay, Stephen, you're going to do this, and Joel, you're going to do that, and that's all you're ever going to do. No, Stephen, you're going to have to do marketing and operations, and you're going to have to do sales, and you're going to have to do finance. And, we don't, when you're 5 or 10 people, you got to do it all. And some of this is cultural as well. Like you go to Germany or some other country which has more of a regulated style of work, you're going to put the
Yeah.
screws in and somebody else is going to turn the screwdriver. In this case, Joel, I'm thinking more on the Western, American style of business where
Mm-hmm.
like it's 5 guys and a dog. And
Yep.
they're like, look, guys, we got to do everything. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and by the way, that's what kind of defines our American style of
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurialism, which is we will roll up the sleeves, and we
Mm-hmm.
will
Mm-hmm.
come to the table and we will do what it takes to get it done. And we will not be inhibited by level, role, responsibility, function. That's not my job. That's your job. Any of that business, right? So when you
Mm-hmm.
get back to the individualism, it's very different culturally. I would say what you need to do is inspire people to be a part of the journey. Like, I'm starting this company. We're going to do XYZ. We're going to change the world. That's going to draw a certain personality type, a certain kind of worker, a certain type of skill to the table. So
Mm-hmm.
in the early stage, you're going to look for those people who, and I mentioned this before, the phases or stages of a company. In the very earliest stage, you want people who are going to roll up their sleeves and do what it takes just to get the company bootstrapped and up and running. There is a inflection point where the company grows to a point where you need to bring in different leaders who have different skills and different employees and different skills to take it to the next level. Startups, for instance, in software space, which I'm most familiar with, we're going to start off with a very lean group of people in the very early stage. It's going to be an executive who's maybe the founder. He or she's either a technologist or they're a business person. They're going to come up with an idea. They're going to hire the right kind of technical talent to actually architect and build the very first generation of the prototype and or minimum viable product or MVP. They're going to get that off the ground. They're going to attract interest. That's going to be that first part of that journey, which is just proving value. And then once you get to that next phase, now we want to staff this beyond early stage development into actually operationalizing and driving the output of producing a first generation product that will be up for sale. And still, you won't go off and hire a big sales team. You won't hire marketing.
Mm-hmm.
You'll just do that early founder led campaign, which is going out to companies and saying, I've got this great technology. It's just been released. I want you to come aboard and try it.
Mm-hmm.
This is called product market fit. The product fits a distinct need for a distinct set of customers, and there's interest to buy. When you get to the next inflection point and you want to actually scale the company up to go more broadly into different markets, you're still with one product. You're not thinking about a second or a third. You're going to try to grow that in the market. That's when you start bringing in salespeople and marketing people and operations people to actually take that to the very next level. My point of all this is that each of these phases is going to have different styles of people, and the individual contributions are going to be very different. The
Hmm.
constant across that journey and trajectory is going to be the belief in something, the belief in the company, the belief in the vision of the company, the belief that what we're doing is for the greater good and will drive this company into success. So even if
Right.
you're two guys and a dog, or 10 people, or 30 people, or 150, or 1,500 people,
Hmm.
that constant is, even though the company is changing and growing, the constant is what we're doing. The belief in what we're doing is going to change our customers' lives. Customer centric thinking, reasons to believe we're going to be successful, all of those things are really important to the group. To the individual, they'll all bring their own individual POV or perspectives, but that's what's going to make this thing a success. If
Hmm.
those things are there, then you know you've got something good. So it gets down to execution at that point. And every one of those phases in the early stage I mentioned are all about execution.
Well, looking at it from, so we've looked at it from an executive standpoint. I mean, there's a lot of people, and I don't blame them for that, that are looking for careers and a lifestyle
Yes.
that's at least simple and somewhat planned out from a career point of view, where they know they're going to school for accounting and they're going to be an accountant,
Finance or whatever, yeah.
whatever. But there's also people who like to be in those fast-paced environments. You as an executive, let's say you're a founder of XYZ software company, and you're hiring an associate or right hand, an assistant, a personal assistant, whatever the position's title is. How can can a young person, a aspiring professional, position themselves in this fast-paced environment with executives getting their email inboxes, their LinkedIn flooded day by day?
Joel, I know you. I've gotten to know you for many, many months. Man, we've been talking forever. You have risk for appetite. First, in your personal life, you're a footballer.
Mm-hmm.
You are courageous. You're fearless. In your professional life, you're driven to take on more. And by the way, these are characteristics of the people that I just mentioned in the trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
They're risk oriented, they're risk takers, they're willing to take on more, loaded on, they'll do whatever it takes kind of mentality. You're fed and excited by the challenge. I am too, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Generations regardless.
Mm-hmm.
I am the same as you in the sense that I'm fearless. Somebody says, we need to do this. And we might say, we've never done it before. And be like, I don't care. I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get it done. I'll Google it. I'll
Yeah.
figure it out. Right. I'll do a
Yeah.
DIY video. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
the point is, you're fearless. You're approaching your career as you do, the same as you do on the field. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know the job, you know what needs to be done, and you see the goalpost. And if I have to take on 5 functions to drive this, I'm going to get to the other side of that goalpost, and I'm going to spike the ball when I get there. But maybe it's like the big deal, or the expansion, or it's into US, or it's taking on a new
Mm-hmm.
department, whatever that goal is. So you asked about how do we get the attention in
Right.
companies, right? So it starts with visibility. I'm going to give you two aspects of this. One is visibility, and then one is personal professional branding. So, and the the branding helps with visibility, but I will tell you,
Mm-hmm.
visibility, getting in front of people in your company who matter, getting in front of people who matter is a measure of visibility. They have to know who you are. They have to recognize you. You have to be introduced. You have to be brought into the inner sanctum. You have to be brought to the table. Now, in small companies, visibility is easier. We all sit at the same conference table. I know who Joel is and I know what he's doing. When
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about 40,000 person company, and you're
Mm-hmm.
mid-level and you're a manager and you've got a specific function and a specific team, and you may or may not have reports, you may be an individual contributor. It takes the generosity and the gumption of a leader, someone who
Mm-hmm.
manages you, to get you in front of the right people so that you are a known entity to the people that matter. I have a philosophy that there, at any given time in any given company, there are only about 20 people in the entire company, let's just say a large company, that actually make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I, I, I could be completely wrong, but I've seen it in my own career.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that pool changes constantly. I'm not saying there are
Right.
always 20 people that make decisions. At
Right.
any given time, there are only about 20 people in any given company of, say, 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 people sized that make material decisions. A lot of times the same people are in it, but let's just say it changes constantly. How do you get to be one of the 20 people that matter for that moment in time to make that critical decision for that company. Visibility helps you get into that circle. Second,
Mm-hmm.
your execution, right? The ability to execute and deliver value. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you this because I've been in that group of 20 where the
Right.
CEO taps me on the shoulder and says, I need you to run with this. I need you to own this. I need you to help me solve this problem. And next
Mm-hmm.
thing we're charting an acquisition or we're launching a new brand or a new product. I'm telling you, that's happened to me. Has it happened at every job I've had? No, but it's happened a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So how did I get there? Visibility. Somebody believed in me, brought me into that group, made my name known, put me in front of that audience and delivered a presentation,
Mm-hmm.
CC'd me on the email and allowed me to chime in and give my perspective. Those
Mm-hmm.
are visibility moments. Second, personal, professional branding. I need to build that brand. I just
Mm-hmm.
mentioned being brought into a venue in which I can express my thoughts, weigh in, provide guidance to the people in that small group. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was at one of the biggest computer companies in the world. The CEO brought me in to solve a critical problem over email. We never physically ever met,
Mm-hmm.
not once. But she asked me in a critical period of time what my thoughts were. I weighed in and I helped solve the problem. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I was known by her leadership circle as well. But my point to you is I was only in that email chain because of my boss.
Mm-hmm.
But how did I get into that email chain? My boss helped promote me. He would say,
Mm-hmm.
Stephen is the right person for that. Stephen can solve that issue. So I had visibility because of my responsibilities in the company. But the brand was built by me. And the brand was
Mm-hmm.
built by execution, repeat execution and success. I said I was going to do something. I did it. And on the other side of it, I was able to claim victory. And the victory was for the company. It wasn't for me. This
Mm-hmm.
personal victory was for me. Now, how do I take that brand forward? Who am I as a person? Personally, I'm a father. I'm a believer in God. I'm a musician. I'm creative. I'm curious. I love information. I love to study. I love to learn. I'm a husband. My spouse,
Mm-hmm.
she's my best friend and life partner. And we do everything together from taking on every bit of my career to raising our family. You know,
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff is like, all those things matter. I'm just saying that's me as a person. When I get into work, I take a lot of that personality into work, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
boundaries. You don't want to, bring too much of it into work, but then when I build myself professionally, it's like accomplishment driven. It's execution driven, as I've said. It's about building authentic relationships. It's about being there for other people in my
Mm-hmm.
organization and other parts of the team, my peers, my boss, leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's in You do this leadership stuff in your personal life, the way you live, how you present yourself, how you live from a morale perspective, and then how you do it at work.
Mm-hmm.
But many of the principles we live in our personal lives are transferable to our professional. So
Right.
that's about what we have to do to help build our brands. How do people perceive me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm there for them. I'll pick
Mm-hmm.
up the phone. You mentioned picking up the phone, getting in the inbox, responding on email, responding in LinkedIn Messenger. You did the
Mm-hmm.
same to me when you reached out to me on Instagram, right?
Right.
I'm reachable. I'm available. That matters. You don't want to make yourself too available because you have your life to live, right? You don't want to let that get
Mm-hmm.
in the way.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give you a professional but also personally inspiring story.
Mm-hmm.
I When I was early career and this was conveyed to me through another party. It was actually my boss who told me this story at the time. I was working for one of the largest banks in the world. I was in IT. I was an IT architect. It was
Mm-hmm.
early in my career. And we were sitting around having lunch and we were talking about something. And the person was communicating to me the importance of humility in the position. And
Mm-hmm.
they said to me that they recounted a story of our then president of the bank who was working after hours, sitting in their office, finishing up for the day. And they received a call on their handset, on their phone. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The secretary had gone away, gone home for the day. The call directly came to the president of the entire bank.
Mm-hmm.
He picks up the phone and the person says, hello. And he says hello. And he doesn't name himself. I'm the president of the bank. He just says hello, blah, blah, blah. How can I help you? Right. The
Mm-hmm.
regular thing that you would say if somebody was going to call you on the phone. And he says, The person on the other line said something like, I'm looking for X and Y and Z, and I'm confused, and I was trying to get to this. The president of the bank said, I know exactly who you need to talk to. He said, I am going to stay on this line with you. I'm going to transfer you until you're on the other end, and I know that person is picked up,
Mhm.
and you are going to be dealt with in a professional and courteous manner, and I'm going to make sure that happens. This person who's working his end of the day, he's in charge of billions of dollars of
Mhm.
wealth across multiple continents, one of the
Yeah.
largest banks in the world, picks up a phone from a random person calling in to probably check their balance on their checking account. And
Yeah.
he manages the whole conversation to ensure that that person is treated with the respect that they deserve because they are the customer.
Right.
And he does it with great humility and hands that person off personally to the person
Mhm.
who will solve their problem. Until he knows that they are okay, he disengages. That is a baller move. It
Yeah.
shows he is a servant and he is a leader.
Right.
And there's no job that that guy can do that is beneath him. It is a prime example of servant leadership. And I
Right.
absolutely will remember that job for the rest of my days.
Right.
And I will
There
remember
was
that story.
Yeah, last year I was my O-line coach for the last team I played for is Greg Studrava, who is probably best known as the O-line coach at the Ohio State University, and he came down to the European League of Football where I played to coach us, and um, we were watching film. I came in early to watch some of my tape with him, and then in the middle of it, we're going through film, and I asked him questions, and he said, Joel, because I was kind of getting down. I was like, oh, I messed this play up as well. And he said, Joel, I promise you one thing. You can never cheat football because you cannot be a great football player without being a good person. And there's leaders out there, and I've dealt with them personally, where they're up there, they're signing your paycheck, they're in charge of your career, but
Yeah.
besides the paid hours you spent at your company, you're not want to spend time with them. You're not doing the after
Right.
hours on Fridays at the office. That resonates with me so much because that even if you're at an early stage in a company, you have to keep the people to your company by being, as you said, a servant leader. By conveying the message, conveying the passion and the dream and the goal you have, but to do it in a way where people value more than just the money. As I guess segueing out of this episode, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about what prepares a professional to become that type of leader. I understand that there's a lot to learn to become that type of person to be able to lead in that manner. And it's a process you can't cheat. What would you say are the best ways to truthfully prepare yourself as a young person that wants to become a leader down the road?
Look, I think all this starts with kind of who you surround yourself with. It starts with you having some really good influences in your life. I've had the blessing in my life of having some very good mentors. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't know they were mentors.
Mm-hmm.
Like you call me a mentor, right? But they didn't know they were mentors. But it's finding those people in your lives, whether they be in the physical or virtual, people you can have authentic communications and connections with that can give you these kinds of perspectives and help you navigate. And they can, by the way, they can be reverse mentors as well. They can be younger and different levels of the career and giving you
Mm-hmm.
different like you're reverse mentoring me on things, right? So I think that's what you have to find as a young person who wants to learn more, do more. Find somebody that can help you with that, whether they're at the same level or at a level up. They've done that. They've been there. They've had experience. My current mentor gave me a really great bit of advice. He said, like, when he was in his career around the same stage as mine, executive, VP level,
Mm-hmm.
he took a chance at a company where he would have to sacrifice a lot for his family. But
Mm-hmm.
he put a boundary around it. He said, these are the things I'm willing to do. These are the things I'm not willing to do. And this was particularly relevant to me as I was looking to leave the last big company I was at. And I said, okay, so what are those things that are going to define my next opportunity? What are the non-negotiables? And he
Mm-hmm.
helped me kind of chart those out because he gave me this great example of what his non-negotiables were. He had some negotiables and they were very tough. Like he was going to have to spend every single week in Austin, Texas for
Mm-hmm.
every month. He's like, look, if that's what it takes and your wife and you can handle it, you might need to be in that place every week, 3 days to be in the
Mm-hmm.
office, to be able to be at your level, to be visible in a headquarters situation. And he gave me this
Mm-hmm.
great advice. But outside of that, he gave me all these other conditions, these non negotiables. And that was just like refreshing to me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to come to the table and say, I'm not going to take anything less than this. I wouldn't have had that, Joel, if I didn't have that conversation, if I didn't learn those lessons, if he didn't provide me those lessons, those would be very hard for me. And he was very
Mm-hmm.
helpful in my decision forming, like what I was going to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say finding the group of people around you, those that can help influence you, that can help guide you, can help lead you, can help mentor you, can help inspire you. Those are
Mm-hmm.
things that I would say a young person should be looking for. You might not get it all. You might get some. You might not get it from one person. It may take many people in order to do that. But those are the kinds of things that I would recommend. I do think the circles you run in matter. I
Mm-hmm.
think who you associate yourself with, that matters. So I'd say surrounding yourself with the right people is the key.
Freedom is not being able to do what you want to do. Freedom is not having to do the things you don't want to do.
Right.
Sure, you have to be in a certain position in your life where you're able to walk away from a job because one of your non negotiables was met or not met. But at the same time, going back to you saying, surround yourself with the right people, to the people listening and thinking, well, how do I reach out and how do I gain the attention of my favorite person out there, my favorite exec? I can tell you from experience, write that damn message.
Yeah.
Do not be afraid to be
Send the
seen
note.
trying. Do not
Send.
be. I failed a lot in my early years after high school. I failed a lot. But I never was afraid to be seen trying. And the amount of tries at some point will compound into success.
Look, Berkeley, when I studied music back in the late 80s and early 90s before I graduated, I would sit in the practice room and play for 4 or 5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Just like
Yep.
you go on the field. It's the same. Every day is a practice until it's game time, and you never know when
Right.
game is going to be, right? So
Right.
you have to basically put in the time. And that, if we're talking about arts or we're talking about sports, if you want to be a leader in that venue, in that milieu, then you need to put in the time.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm working, I'm focused on delivering excellence. It's
Mm-hmm.
not delivering, good enough. It's delivering excellence. When I feel like I'm out of sorts, I got to get in sorts.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just be sitting back and expecting things to happen.
There's a speech by Nick Saban, legendary Alabama head football coach. It's all over YouTube. The importance of nothing. And the base message goes back to what we talked about earlier. In a big company, you'll get a chance to show up and put your name out there. But what if that situation meets you unexpectedly? What if you're bullshitting 9 out of 12 months out of the year, and on the 10th month, your boss comes around, just happens to use your team for a project, and you've been bullshitting for 9 months. The opportunity will come. I can promise anyone that's listening, the opportunities will be there. You never know when. It might take some time, but they're always going to be there. And it's all about you being prepared whenever it happens. And the only way to always be prepared is to always put your best foot forward. You're going to have bad days. All that's obvious and true. But you got to stay ready. And the only way to stay ready is to put your best foot forward every day.
Amen. Well said.
Stephen, thank you so much to the people listening. I hope you enjoyed and you were able to take some out of it. Feel free to leave us a follow. I'd like to introduce a tradition that seasoned veteran of executive order has the last word. So, Stephen, whatever you want to end this podcast with, go ahead.
I would just say I hope this session inspires somebody to try a little harder, even just reconcile with where they are and they want to look deeper into how they can improve. I think that's the key. You're always, striving for that next level, like we've been talking about. And the moment we get too complacent about things is the moment that it's over.
Yeah.
Always striving to be better personally, professionally, spiritually, physically. Those are all things that you got to think about every day and be the very best you can. I think that's what's really exciting about it.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Joel. It's a pleasure.